She was his cold-hearted CEO, until he stayed late to fix her mistake, and she said three words that changed everything. Before we begin the story, don't forget to subscribe and follow Tender Bonds. Like and share our story. The pipe burst on a Thursday night in January at 11:14 p.m., and Silas felt it before he heard it. He'd been in the east hallway of Drexler Medical Supply, running new conduit along the fourth floor's baseboard, alone in the building except for the CEO 2 offices down whose Volvo was still in the lot. He felt the pressure change. A building has a pressure, like a body has a temperature, and he'd learned to read it in 11 months of fixing everything that broke in this place. He felt the change, and then came the sound. Not dramatic, not the way pipes burst in movies, just a sustained rush, like something that had been holding its breath since 2009 and had finally, quietly stopped. He was moving before the sound finished. The server room was locked. Cass Drexler's office was not. He went through hers, through the connecting door to the server anteroom, and found 6 inches of cold water under the raised floor panels and a steady pour from the ceiling chase where a joint had failed. A joint he'd written up in a facilities report in October that had gone to the building management company and been used, apparently, as a coaster. He found the secondary shutoff in the chase access panel, killed the feed. The pouring stopped. He stood in the silence of a room that had just done damage, water up to his bootlaces, and thought of Miller. Not intentionally. He never thought of Miller intentionally anymore. The grief had gone underground and now came up through the senses, through diesel fumes and the particular slam of a heavy door. But there was something about standing in a flooded room alone at midnight that was essentially Miller. Miller Trace, who had worked for this company for 6 years, who had died 14 months ago when a truck took a yellow light on Market Street, who had been the only person in Silas's life who would drive somewhere if Silas stopped calling. It was Miller who'd first taught him about secondary shutoffs, standing in his father's Youngstown garage on a summer afternoon, talking the whole time with the confidence he'd had about mechanical things since he was old enough to take apart a clock. "Find the feed," Miller had said, "before you start mopping." Silas started mopping. He had the shop vac from the janitorial closet running, and 2 floor panels already out when the light came on in Cass Drexler's office. He heard her before he saw her, the particular 2-beat rhythm of her heels, which he knew the way he knew which stairwell door needed lifting. 2 steps, then the stop. She'd seen the water. She appeared in the doorway in a dark coat, hair down in a way he'd never seen on company time, and her eyes went from the floor to the ceiling to him, in that order, the way a person inventories damage. "What happened?" she said, not a question, an assessment. "Chase joint on 4. Secondary shutoff is closed, no active pour." "My laptop." "Filing cabinet. I moved it when I came through." She went to the cabinet, checked it, came back. Her feet were in 3 inches of water and she wasn't acknowledging it. "The quarterly," she said. "Beg your pardon." "Quarterly report." Her voice had the quality of a door being held shut by hand. "I had it open on the server. The board presentation is at 8 a.m. He pulled another panel, stacked it. "Server rack is elevated. Drives are probably clean, but I can't promise. The Atlanta backup is current as of 3 this afternoon." She said it the way people say things they've already calculated. "But it doesn't open until 7. I have Gerald's cell from the October outage." She looked at him then, not the look she used in hallways, not the altitude look that Deb in accounting called her pressure drop, but a direct look, as if she were recalculating something she'd already filed away. "Call him," she said, "please." He'd heard her say please before, twice in 11 months by his count, both times in the cadence of a word being used technically, like a tool kept in a drawer for specific occasions. This one came out differently. He didn't remark on it. He called Gerald, who answered on the 4th ring in the voice of a man who'd been deeply asleep and had opinions about it. Silas talked him through remote access in the flat, specific way that got them where they needed without ceremony. And in 8 minutes, Gerald confirmed the Atlanta backup was intact and the document was recoverable. Silas said thank you and hung up. "You're set," he said. She didn't respond immediately. She was on the edge of her desk, which she'd pulled clear of the water, coat still on, phone in her hand. When he told her, her hand with the phone lowered slowly to her knee and she sat. "Okay," she said. He went back to the panels. He pulled 4 more. The shop vac ran. Outside, the January night was doing what January nights do in Youngstown, nothing dramatic, just the steady, indifferent work of cold that has all the time it needs. He'd been working another 20 minutes when he heard her on the phone. "Hey, baby." Her voice dropped a register he hadn't known it had. "I know it's late, I know. Something happened at the building. I'll be home soon. Is Grandma there?" He kept his hands in the floor. "I know, Joni. I know, sweetheart. Put Grandma on." A pause, then, "Mom, I'm so sorry. Yes, I know it's past 10. She woke up." He could hear thinly a child's voice through the phone. The particular frequency of a kid who has been woken and is frightened and is doing the work of not showing it. He recognized that frequency. He'd been that kid once, waiting up in a house that felt too big and too quiet, before he'd understood that the quiet was just how it was going to be. He stood up. His jacket was over the chair in the anteroom. He went and got his phone, came back, pulled up the camera. The floor panels were out, the water drained, the subfloor visible. It looked industrial now, managed, not catastrophic. A thing in progress rather than a disaster. He walked to the doorway of her office. She was looking at nothing, phone against her ear, doing the work of her voice. He held the phone out. She looked at it, then at him. "For Joni," he said, "so she can see it's not scary." Something crossed her face. Crossed it from the inside, moving through features that had been set to neutral, and for a moment the door was open, and he could see what was behind it, not weakness, not fragility, but the specific exhaustion of someone who has been the only load-bearing wall for a long time and knows exactly what that costs. She took the phone, looked at the picture, forwarded it without a word. He went back to the floor. He had come to Youngstown because of Miller, which was the simple answer. The longer answer he had not looked at directly. After Miller died, Silas had driven down from Cleveland on a Thursday and stayed through the following Tuesday, sleeping on Deb and Miller's couch. And on Tuesday morning he stood in their kitchen watching Petra, 11 years old, Miller's ears, Miller's habit of tilting her head 45 degrees when she was thinking, eating cereal before school. Deb was getting ready for her shift. The house was doing what houses do after someone central to them dies. Continuing, with the mechanical indifference of systems that don't know they've lost their reason. He'd called his landlord that afternoon, then his supervisor. He moved his couch, his bed, his kitchen table and its 2 chairs, both of which he'd used alone, independently, as it had not until that moment occurred to him to find strange, to a rental on McGuffey Road, and took the job at Drexler because there was an opening, and because it was where Miller had been. He told himself it was for Deb and Petra. He told himself this the way you tell yourself things that are true enough not to require examination. He fixed their furnace in December. He brought groceries. He drove Petra to her school play in October when Deb couldn't swap her shift. What he did not tell himself, what sat underneath the charitable story like rebar in concrete, was that before Youngstown he had been disappearing. Not with any crisis he could name, not with drama. Just the slow erasure of a man who asks too little of the world and whom the world accordingly stops registering. The Cleveland apartment with the 2 chairs. The woman who'd left and said, with a precision that had stayed with him, that being with him was like dating a very polite fog. He turned that over for months, curious rather than wounded, wondering if she was wrong. When Miller died, what Silas felt beneath the grief, in its grain, was terror. because Miller had been the last person who would notice if Silas disappeared all the way, who would drive somewhere if Silas stopped calling. And with Miller gone, Silas was complete, in the loneliest possible sense of that word. He moved to Youngstown to save them. He had not yet understood what was saving him. The toolbox had been in his truck bed since November. It was Miller's, scarred red metal, a strip of electrical tape wound around the hasp where the original latch had cracked, the paint on the left side worn to bare steel from 10,000 times of being slid across a truck bed or a garage floor or the back of some other man's tailgate. Silas had taken it from Deb's garage when he'd moved down, not because he needed it. He had his own kit, but because it was Miller's and Miller was gone, and the toolbox was the most Miller-shaped thing that remained, the object that most held his volume and weight and the particular confidence he'd had about how things worked. He kept meaning to bring it inside. The cold had aged the electrical tape from stiff to soft, had moved the rust along the hasp another shade toward orange. He kept not doing it. On the morning after the pipe burst, he was back by 6 with drying fans and a full kit, and when he went to his truck for a socket he needed, he brought the toolbox in from the bed without thinking about it. Set it inside the building's rear entrance, told himself he'd put it back later. He did not put it back. Cass Drexler found him at 10:15, in the east hallway where he'd returned to the conduit run the flood had interrupted. She came around the corner with 2 paper cups of coffee and held one out. He had never, in 11 months, received coffee from Cass Drexler. "Presentation went well," she said. "Good. Gerald says the rack's clean. I saw. You'll want it to run diagnostics before the expansion anyway." I told them. She hadn't moved. The coffee was still extended. He took it. She looked at the conduit run along the baseboard, the new housing he'd fished before the pipe blew everything up. "You had the server room ready," she said, "before any of this." "It was in the work order. Deb said you asked to be put on the server project specifically." Her voice was neutral, not warm, but differently neutral than usual, not the altitude cold, just even. "She said you asked 3 weeks ago." "I knew the expansion was coming." "You knew it was Miller's project," she said, "before he died." He looked at the conduit. "Yes." She drank her coffee. He drank his. The fluorescent above them hummed on its D-flat frequency, the one he'd never fixed because it had become structural, become part of the sound of the place. "He talked about you," she said. "Miller did. He said you were the kind of person who showed up." He was generous. He was accurate. She said it without emphasis, the way she said things she'd already decided. Then, "The pipe wasn't your fault. The report you filed in October was correct. I should have escalated it." He looked at her. She was looking at the conduit, her cup in both hands, and her face had the expression of someone who has said a thing they don't unsay. "That's not why I stayed," he said. "I know that," she said. Deb arranged the dinner the way she arranged most things she'd decided on, without warning and without apology, setting a 4th place at the table and telling Silas on the phone that she was making kielbasa and pierogi and that 6 o'clock was 6 o'clock. He arrived to find Cass Drexler's gray Volvo at the curb. Cass Drexler at Deb's table was not Cass Drexler on the 4th floor. She was quieter and less assembled. She ate the kielbasa with a directness that said she was actually hungry, not managing an appearance of eating, and she asked Petra about school without the careful enunciation of an adult performing interest. Petra, who had inherited Miller's quality of looking through surfaces and reporting what she found, gave the food the same attention she gave her book, which was total. "You work with Mom," Petra said to Cass. "I do. She says you're hard to read." Across the table, Deb went entirely still. "She's right," Cass said. "I'm working on it." Petra considered this with the head tilt 45 degrees, Miller's exact angle, and returned to her pierogi, apparently satisfied. Silas helped Deb with the dishes. From the kitchen he could hear Cass talking to Petra, the register dropping the same way it did on the phone to Joni, and Petra saying in her father's unadorned way, "You can ask me real questions. I don't like the ones adults think kids like." A pause, and then Cass said, "Are you scared about middle school?" The dish Silas was drying. He continued drying long past dry. "Yes," Petra said. "Are you scared of anything?" He set the dish down. Deb appeared beside him and took it without comment. "She's scared of plenty," Deb said quietly. "Not gossip. Just information, offered the way she'd always offered things, directly, without editorializing, the way Miller had talked." "I know," Silas said. "You're the same." He picked up another dish. He drove Cass home because her car was in for service, offered because the offer was there, and he made it before deciding whether he should. She lived 12 blocks from Deb on a street of mid-century doubles with deep front porches. Hers had a lamp on a timer, on when they pulled up, throwing its light across the porch boards and the rusted porch rail and the hanging basket that had gone bare in October and not been taken down. He sat with the truck idling. She didn't get out immediately. "Joni's at her dad's this week," she said. He looked at the lamp. "The lamp's on a timer," she said, "even when she's not here." She said it the way she said things she'd decided to say, with precision and without asking what he thought of it. "I know how that is," he said. She turned. She was looking at him the way she'd looked at him in the flooded anteroom, the recalculating look, but something in it was different now, less closed. "You came here for Deb and Petra," she said. "Yes. But you stayed." He looked at the lamp. He thought of the 2 chairs in the Cleveland apartment, both of them used alone. He thought of the woman who'd said fog. He thought of Miller's voice in a garage in 1999, patient and exact. "Find the feed before you start mopping." "I stayed," he said. She got out of the truck. At the porch she paused, not a wave, not a signal, just a pause in the lamp's light, and he understood that the pause was something she was offering, and that she knew he understood it, and that neither of them was going to say so. Then she went inside and left the lamp on. He sat in the idling truck for a long time. He thought, sitting there in the January cold with the heat running and the lamp across the street doing its patient work, about the thing he had not looked at directly. He did not look at it now. He just felt its shape, the way you feel a room in the dark, the edges and dimensions of it, the furniture you know is there. He had moved to Youngstown to save them. But he had been saved, systematically and without ceremony, by Deb's kielbasa and Petra's tilted head and a porch lamp on a timer and 2 cups of coffee in a fluorescent hallway, and the particular register a woman's voice drops to when she is talking to her child in the middle of a disaster. He had been saved by being needed, by being the person in the building who felt the pressure change, by fixing the things that were his to fix. He had been saved from the long, polite disappearance, the erasure of a man who asks too little of the world, by a city that needed him to show up, and that he had shown up for, and that had consequently refused to forget him. He had dressed it as sacrifice. It was also survival. It had always been both. The lamp stayed on when he drove away. In February she came to find him about the east stairwell door, the one that didn't latch right, that you had to lift slightly as you pulled. He'd known about it for 11 months. He'd been writing it up and crossing it off in the same report cycle, low priority, cosmetic. She came to him specifically, not through the facility's ticket system. "The door," she said. "The east stairwell. Every time I leave late, I can't tell if it's latched." "It latches, you have to lift a little." I know how it works." She paused. "I'd just like it to work without knowing how." He went and fixed it that afternoon. Shimmed the frame, adjusted the strike plate, tested it 8 times. It closed clean. He did not put a ticket in for the labor. The school play was March, Joni's class doing Charlotte's Web at the elementary school on Todd Avenue. Parking impossible. Cass mentioning the date and the parking in the same sentence, and then stopping mentioning things and looking elsewhere. He said he'd drive. Joni played a sheep. She had 2 lines and delivered both with the gravity of someone who understood that a sheep with 2 lines was still a sheep with 2 lines, and the audience found this funny, and Joni did not acknowledge this, and Silas found the whole thing so completely Miller in its dignity that he had to look at the middle distance for a moment. Afterwards in the parking lot, Joni found him standing by the truck and said, without preamble, "The sheep is important because it eats the grass that Wilbur would have eaten so Wilbur stays healthy. The sheep doesn't get a web, but the sheep still does the thing." She ran ahead to find her teacher. Silas stood with his hands in his jacket pockets. Cass came up beside him. They watched Joni locate her teacher with the focused efficiency of a child who always knows where she is going. "She said that to me too," Cass said. "2 nights ago, I think she wrote it herself." "I think she did." They stood there. The parking lot was draining of parents and children, coats and backpacks, the noise of a school event unraveling into a regular evening. The cold was different now, March cold, not January cold, a cold that was working less hard, a cold that had somewhere to be. It was April when he finally brought the toolbox in properly. He'd been at her place on a Saturday, fixing a window sash that had swollen all winter and refused to close flush. Simple job. He'd brought the full toolbox because he needed a specific socket, and it was easier than sorting the smaller bag. He fixed the window in 40 minutes, and when he tested it, up, down, latched clean, he felt the satisfaction that had no ego in it, the satisfaction of a fixed thing. Joni was at the kitchen table with her succulents, 3 of them in mismatched pots she'd accumulated over the winter, one of them clearly dying and not being told. She was looking at the toolbox. "Is that yours?" she said. "It was my friend's, he died." She looked at it with Miller's angle. "Do you still use it?" "Every day." She nodded the adult nod. "You could put the succulents in the tray part," she said. "The tray lifts out, and you could drill holes so they drain." He looked at the toolbox, the hasp with its electrical tape, now soft and frilled with cold and age, the bare steel on the left side, the lid that fit perfectly despite everything it had been through, the kind of fit that is less about precision than about the slow accommodation of 2 things that have been together long enough to know each other's edges. He set it on the counter, opened it, pulled the tray. He found a drill bit, borrowed her drill from the utility closet, put 6 clean holes in the tray's base. Then he set the pots in one by one. They fit. He put the tray back in the box. He carried it to the kitchen windowsill, where the light came through best. He heard her come into the kitchen. When he turned, she was in the doorway. She was looking at the toolbox on her windowsill, Miller's toolbox, rust and electrical tape and the worn steel where his hand had worn it, and her face was the inside face, the one he'd seen in the flooded office and only glimpsed since. Open, specific, the door not performing being closed. She looked from the toolbox to him. "I see you," she said. He stood with his hands at his sides. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the April light was doing what April light does in Ohio, arriving without ceremony after a winter that had been in no hurry to leave, pale and specific and true. 3 words, not the 3 words people expected. The 3 words nobody had said to him since Miller, and before Miller almost no one. Not "I love you," not anything that announced itself. Just the 3 words that were their precise shape and no other that meant, "I have been watching the way you move through the world and I have seen what is actually there." He did not say anything. She did not require him to. Joni came back in for a glass of water, looked at the toolbox, looked at the succulents, looked at the 2 of them with Miller's assessing tilt and said, "That's better," and left. He drove home in the late afternoon, the April light low and thin across the flat Ohio land, the kind of light that makes everything look considered, every telephone pole, every chain-link fence, every gas station sign a deliberate choice. He stopped at a red light on Manning and the truck was quiet. The passenger seat was empty. He looked at it not long, not with anything that needed a name. He thought of what Joni had said. The sheep still does the thing. He thought of the toolbox on the windowsill, the succulents in its tray, the 6 drainage holes he'd drilled with the same bit Miller had bought at a hardware store in 2003. He thought of a lamp left on. The light changed. He put the truck in gear and drove home through the April evening, through the city that had saved him while he was busy saving it, through the streets he now knew the way you know a place you have decided to stay in, not completely, not without question, but enough. Just enough to keep the lights on.